All right, is everyone able to see the, starts out with the leadership corner, decisions that are right for you?
Looks good, Shelby.
All right, perfect. So real quick, I'm Shelby Majors, the Central Zone UPFM Assistant Fire Management Officer Operations. Been here for just a few months now, and yeah, it's been an interesting time to get to hop in. I guess quick little background, tying in with the theme of the day, binge watching. I haven't been binge watching a whole lot, though we did just start the 2004 version of Battlestar Galactica, intermixed with Letterkenny, and it's a strange combo. I do a lot of podcasts. Revolutions is probably a top favorite. And then I guess favorite TV show, Northern Exposure. So yeah, there you go. Next 45 minutes, gonna cover kind of a broad range of topics here, focused in on some of the leadership, but you know, we're gonna talk about some of this personal decision-making space, risk-informed decision-making, decent video here that we're gonna show that I think will tie in and help kind of set the stage for a presentation that'll be coming after lunch that Noah Hale's gonna share with us. We'll talk about the proper risk refusal process, and then kind of elaborate on the modules 1 and work-life balance. And again, all of this is going to be kind of covered in some of the in light of current events, etc. You know, what I'm going to be sharing here is a fair bit of subjective information, and really wanted to have folks take this information, think about it, and in the light of, again, COVID-19 again, of how this is going to look for you over the course of the season. And obviously things are going to change and evolve, but apply it for yourself and then go forward from there. Here's the risk decision-making video. Dave Williams from the Northern Region I want to share with folks. Again, this is a good setting the stage for some of the stuff that Noah's going to be talking about, but I think also kind of helping guide a lot of the conversations over the course of this season, as we pull a lot of the stuff from the WFRP into our risk decision making process.
My name is Dave Williams, and I'm the Northern Region Fire Operations Risk Management Officer. As we adjust to this new normal of living and working with COVID-19, many of us are wrestling with how to make risk-informed decisions and then how to implement them. I want to take just a few minutes to discuss a couple of important factors to keep in mind as you navigate these challenges. We're all striving to mitigate the spread of the virus, protect our employees, their families, and the communities we live in, and be prepared for and ultimately accomplish our work. Our Regional Forester team has been very clear with their intent that the risks and trade-offs associated with our actions need to inform our decisions. One of the reasons this is so difficult with COVID-19 is due to the added variability that it inserts into our risk environment. Risk is typically expressed in terms of likelihood and severity, and while there is always some level of subjectivity assessing risk, it's important to understand that assessing the risk in a pandemic is not just subjective, it's also both variable and highly dynamic. The individual severity associated with this virus is anywhere from negligible to catastrophic, depending on individual susceptibility, such as age and/or underlying health conditions. You yourself may not be at high risk, but maybe those who depend on your care are. The likelihood of contracting or spreading the virus is also highly variable, depending on factors such as how prevalent the virus is in your area, your ability to maintain social distancing, personal hygiene, and meeting cleaning and disinfecting guidelines for common spaces or equipment. Accurately assessing the likelihood is not only dependent on your ability to implement these mitigations, but also your local population's ability to do so as well. So, we need to use risk to provide decision rationale, and we need to document it. One of the first questions I'd like you to ask yourself here is, what are you looking to inform? A decision? Or has the decision been made and you need help managing and communicating the risk involved? We have different tools for different needs. A risk assessment, job hazard analysis, and even tailgate safety form are tools for identifying and assessing hazards, mitigations, and ultimately communicating what we believe the risk to be. This is our 5-step risk management process. Something that we found helpful assessing the risk of COVID-19 is starting with 2 questions as almost a screening process to reduce some of the variability in your assessments. Are you, or is anyone in this decision, considered at high risk of health complications? If yes, you're looking at a higher severity if the virus is present. What are the local spread conditions in your area? This will significantly affect the likelihood of contracting or spreading the virus. Another tool we have found value in is the trade-off analysis. This is a strategic risk-informed decision-making tool designed to display the impacts to criteria we value based on alternative strategies. For example, sharing response resources across our region will most likely have a positive impact on our ability to meet wildland fire control objectives, but will have a negative impact to the potential spread of COVID-19. Ultimately, decision makers weigh these impacts and based on current conditions and priorities, make their decision. The idea here is not eliminating the risk, it's understanding what risks you're accepting and what the trade-offs are. All alternatives include risk. There's a lot we don't know about COVID-19 at this time, but that's changing almost daily, in some cases hourly. What we do know is that our behavior is the most effective tool at mitigating the health impacts of the virus. There are trade-offs, and we need to do our best to identify them, understand them, and communicate them to those that need to know. On this SharePoint page, you will find templates for the tools I mentioned. If you have questions or need another set of eyes as you work through these processes, please reach out and let me know. I'll do the best I can to help, however I can. Thank you.
So yeah, that video will, I think, tie in nicely here with Noah's presentation. It's a good intro on kind of the ORM and risk assessment process. So just kind of bear some of those points in mind. And then also, as Dave said in the video, a lot of the conversations that we're having is that kind of subjective point too. And then one thing too, to really have folks take the conversation forward is assessing where they fall in the risk categories. So whether you're a low risk individual, moderate risk, or in the high risk, but then also the people that you're around, where they're at. Again, kind of going back to what Colin brought up is the possibility of someone being asymptomatic, and just realizing that you could be a carrier and exposing other folks that are in that moderate to high risk. And again, this being a fluid situation, what was being defined as low risk category about a month ago has been proven otherwise as far as how things have been playing out here in the US, with a different demographic still being of a greater exposure. So just some things to bear in mind. There is no perfect playbook or answer here. So with that, folks keep talking about a proper way to refuse risk, or you also hear referred to as the turn down protocols. And one of the things that I want to talk about is, page 19, the IRPG, and then also your 6 minutes for safety covers a lot of this. I'm not going to read through step by step here. You guys have the documents, but I kind of wanted to cover more of the key points. Is you want to remember that this is a tool for having conversation, that it isn't a straight come in. You're not supposed to put your foot down and do a refuse to perform an operation for the day. Provide some of that venue for having conversation. This is a worthwhile tool, and it should be used hopefully early on in the process to try to spark having that conversation. Is there a way that we can mitigate? Is there a way that we can engage and do safely? There's the one bold portion here in the middle. I will read this part. It's when an individual feels an an assignment is unsafe, they also have the obligation to identify, to the degree possible, safe alternatives for completing that assignment. Turning down an assignment is one possible outcome of managing risk. And that's something, again, have that conversation early on. We can capture and can move forward. And it might be that the turn down does end up being the right decision. And we bring that back. And during some of that AAR process, it allows us to maybe think of how we can mitigate those risks, if we can mitigate those risks for the next occurrence. So I think those are important things to remember. I ask folks to, really look through this. And again, in light of everything, take these conversations home and have them with significant others, with family members. Get that idea of who's at what risk level around you. So you're having those conversations sooner than later. And then you can hopefully be bringing some of that to work and then have an open conversation about that as well. So there are some specific guidance that they provide when doing a risk refusal. And those bullet points are, and again, it's in the IRPG, page 19, individuals may turn down an assignment as unsafe when there is a violation of safe work practices, environmental conditions make the work unsafe, the forces lack the necessary qualifications or experience, and effective equipment is being used. So I'm sure a lot of folks are having, images come to mind as we're having some of this conversation here. Again, it ties back in. We're going into a fire season with a overarching framework around us that we're not all that familiar with working in. We're talking about PPE that we haven't necessarily utilized on the ground before. We're talking about unsafe conditions that, again, we don't necessarily have the slides to work with. So again, having that open conversation, getting feedback from people, and then trying to provide those answers. And then also, you heard me mention before, going back to that kind of 10 and 18, using some of that as a reference. I'm sure folks have already seen that we've have quite a bit of plans, waivers, risk assessments, lots of documents that are out there. It's easy to mention, referencing back to CDC guidance, even like just some of the state orders and closures, but there's a lot of things that are changing on a daily basis. So just trying to keep up with that is a pretty full-time task. So again, pull some of the stuff back to where we at least have that context and some familiarity with, and then we can go back out from there to gather and try to answer those questions. So again, these are the typical points of if we are not able to meet these objectives, then this is when we start really looking at that risk refusal. And you heard from Eric, you've heard from Corey, you've heard from Sid that we really do want folks to know that they have this power in hand and to, bear in mind this tool and to have this conversation within your group from the duty officer level on a daily basis down to the captains and crew members. And then I'll also be advocating too that you take this stuff back to home as well to have this conversation. So again, on page 20, the IRPG, you get into a lot of the specifics of the risk refusal process. So the individual directly informs their supervisor they are turning down the assignment as given. And again, they go through some of that process. You document, and then you provide some of that communication. This is in the context of being out on an incident. So they're talking about the safety officer being immediately notified of the burn down, etc., and elevate that back up. Obviously, if we're doing this on an IA, it's a little bit of a different context, but we'd still feed that information back in and notify our safety managers and having some of those conversations and try to help make some informed decisions of how we can work on mitigating. There is a part here too, and I'll provide a link when this is all said and done at the end of this PowerPoint of a FLA that was done a few years ago of a incident commander that turned down an assignment due to AREP and some miscommunication that was occurring between them. But one thing here too is the supervisor asked another resource to perform the assignment. They're responsible to inform the new resource that the assignment was turned down and the reasons why it turned down. Again, you know, if someone's stepping out of their comfort level, you know, they might have a family member that falls in a high risk category that they're in direct encounter with. So this individual steps away. Have that conversation with your supervisor. There is a lot of that gray area that we're talking about, as you know, Sid mentioned earlier, HIPAA, and the different things there. So we do need to be cognizant of those different points. And again, at the end of the day, you can do the documentations through SafeNets and SafeComms, etc. And these operations do not these actions do not necessarily stop an operation from being carried out. This is just part of the communication process, and it might actually lead to making more informed decisions. And a lot of this, again, is, you know, that's the risk refusal process kind of in light of COVID-19. This is also a tool that is there for just day-to-day operations. It came about because of folks having difficulties trying to figure out how to do some of the risk refusal process. I think some of it was Creamer Fire, roughly 10 years ago now. So we want to remember too that this isn't a new process here in light of COVID-19. It is a process out there that we use and apply for any operational assignment. And it's I've seen it used before for a shop crew turning down a burnout operation. And that was really because they were up on their 14th day and it had been a long assignment and there was a newer crew in place, and they felt that it was a better task for that newer crew to assist on, and that crew recommended that they would still engage, but be in a holding crew for the new crew to come in and perform the burnout operation. So there's a lot of things like that, you know, again, you can bring forward some mitigation measures. It is really meant for kind of that operational set of things. Any questions with the risk refusal process? Any additions from other folks out there as far as utilizing this process, whether it's in light of current events or in a broader picture?
Yeah, Shelby, I can send you that that's Skype. But you know, keeping in mind that we're also an all-risk agency, which I know some of the Western governors have started asking for federal firefighter help from the BLM and the Forest Service in regards to some of this COVID-19 response in their areas. My understanding is that the majority of it is to put teams, or using the teams to put an overhead structure in place. But that being said, there's no guarantee that that's not going to also trickle out to some of the other firefighters and potentially us. So I just want to make sure that people understand the assignments that they would be accepting, and using some of this risk refusal information to make those determinations when those types of assignments become available.
Yeah, I was just going to add on some past experiences. Had a situation out west, and you know, all those check marks is why you would turn down were there, and just to share with folks that it's not a hard conversation to have, and that's exactly, you know, what it is. You know, and especially when we talk about just being honest and open and making sure we're putting safety first. my experiences are that they're real constructive. It's a process you work through. It wasn't confrontational for me at all. And then there were some things that came out of it to think about and have conversations about. Because the one thing I was missing when we went into that situation, we were kind of loaned out from the Forest Service to another agency for the day, was that that assignment had been turned down by someone else. And I thought that was a key point that came out of it. I would have liked to know that going in. Really going in, I was just kind of told to be heads up about how they do things, and not given the information that it had been turned down once before. So, but not a hard conversation to have, and had really positive outcomes. You know, when we came down off that fire, the borrowing agency, you know, their management came out and we had a really good discussion about, you know, how to make the situation better and not anything confrontational. So good things come from it.
No, good points, guys. You know, one thing I have heard, and you know, sounds like a lot of the teams have also brought forward some of the lessons learned from when they were doing the hurricane response from Katrina and more recent, but also, you know, they got tasked with a lot of things that they hadn't necessarily done before. And I have heard the conversation brought forward into this that, like Corey mentioned, they might stand up and do some of the C&G. They might provide some leadership at the overhead level to provide some of that guidance, direction, etc. But at the end of the day, we aren't necessarily trained to do certain actions. You know, an example to me would be not all firefighters, wildland firefighters that is, are trained and equipped to respond to car fires or house fires. And so therefore we don't engage on those because we don't have that capability, that training, or even just the PPE for it. So those are things that, again, you know, we are part of the FEMA, of the all response process. So those are things that might be things that, you know, we see coming up throughout the season, and where we can assist, how we can assist. And those will be things that we just need to remember, that we've only been trained to do a certain amount of things. And if we're getting tasked with something that is above our capability, then we do have this process in place and use it. It's a good tool. So any additional comments, questions? So
no,
next slide I just wanted to put up there is there's a lot of the conversation about, and people have been seeing put out there, you know, the module as one. And this is essentially where we have our field going personnel. We're not really able to necessarily break them apart as individual field going personnel and have them responding, as Corey had up there in the AAR from the Meeker fire. You know, folks did respond in the vehicles, then had to move into multiple rig vehicles. So for a lot of this, we're referring to it as the module as one. And I wanted to kind of put together just a quick slide here that captured a little bit of that, but then also broadened it out. So you can see where we've got the captain, assistant, senior crew members, and, you know, in our current configuration with the engine and the chase truck. Really, you know, there needs to be that daily conversation, utilizing the am I fit, and having those conversations at the captain and assistant level with their crew members, and the crew members feeding that back up, and having just good, solid, open communication. To me, at the end of the day, when we talk about a module as one, some folks have referenced it as the family unit, and that's when it really then broadens out of, you know, who are our folks having a daily direct encounter with. You know, to some degree, we have that control with the militia, the volunteer fire department, public encounters in the fire line, And then also fire staff, whether, Corey and I are meeting with them face to face or if it's going to be remote, and then the office. But our folks are going home to, their daily life situation. And so this is just a quick example of, what we might have. A couple folks in a bunkhouse, another one living with their partner, housemate, spouse, partner, housemate, spouse, infant. So again, have those conversations on a broader scale than just the daily briefing within the crew, and know how that stuff can work. Again, very valid point that Colin brought up is the asymptomatic, and folks just need to be aware of that. We talk about keeping contact lists and different things. So again, that's where those things are going to become really important so we can provide that communication out to a larger group. So kind of how I visualize some of this stuff. I think these are important conversations, and, try to make a point of having a little bit of that more open conversation about stuff. So with that, I think that kind of dives into a little bit of the work-life balance. And I know this has been kind of the hot topic of the last few years. There's been different guidance put out on it, different information put forward in the wellness program for the Forest Service. I tend to have a little bit of a different outlook on it than some of the textbook. And these are some just real simple hours of breaking it down. But we got 8,760 hours a year. And given that we've got on an average year working base hours, most folks are going to be working about 1,880 hours of work a year. And that's just figuring it out a 80-hour work week and minus 10 federal holidays. If you actually take full 3 weeks of vacation, figuring that you're in the 6-hour leave category, teasing it out, if you do an average of 7 hours of sleep a night, there's 2,555 hours of sleep. And then that boils down to 4,325 hours of U time. So, when folks are talking about that 1,000-hour season of overtime, you can start seeing how things might really kind of shift, the work-life balance, and there's give and take. So to me, I don't see it as a scale type balance where you're going to make any one thing fit perfectly. It's more of that balance beam kind of scenario in my mind. It takes a fine line to kind of skirt different things. And there's going to be times that you're trying to lean one way to counteract a little bit of the other. And again, it's having that conversation with coworkers, with family members, etc. And you're going to fall off that beam from time to time too. A quote I always kind of liked that helps me remember kind of where the priorities fall at, but is how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. What we do with this hour and that one is what we are doing. Schedule defends from chaos and whim. It is a net for catching days. It is a scaffolding on which a worker can stand and labor with both hands at sections of a time. A schedule is a mock-up of reason and order. So again, kind of going back to, we talked about plans. There's always the best laid plans. There's always kind of this, little magical set of numbers that we have out there. And, to me, I view work, life, and the balance of those two things. Work is part of your life. It is that beam that you're kind of walking, and you're trying to maintain your balance on it. You're going to fall off. There's going to be some give and take with it. So again, especially in the light of things this season, I think there's a lot of importance of having those conversations, both coworkers, with family, and everything else. Things are just a little bit different. So, make sure that we're having open communication as much as possible. So a little bit of stuff on that. And again, like I said at the beginning of this part, there is a lot of subjectivity and kind of what I just passed on there. So any questions, feedback, thoughts?
Good stuff on the work-life balance stuff, Shelby. As a lot of the things we're talking about when it comes to work-life balance, COVID, everything else, these are very personal decisions, and you certainly need to look deep within yourself when you come to your conclusion ultimately. For me, for example, it's changed significantly, that work-life balance. That 1,000 hours that Shelby talked about used to be really attainable and really important to me. But as life has happened, and now I've got 3 kids and a wife, it's much less important to me. And to be honest with you, that 300-hour overtime here is more important. That allows for an additional 700 hours I get to spend with my wife and kids. So as life changes, a lot of your decisions may change. And this goes into your decisions revolving COVID and exposure as well. We've got a firefighter who's got a new 8-week-old baby, and perhaps 12 months ago he would have looked at this significantly different and taken assignments that he may pass on now. So certainly keep that in mind as you guys start to think into this and make some of these decisions.